15th day of May. It's 2024. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're having a great day. I'm going to be your host tonight, Dana Durnford. You can call into the show at 709-589-4406. 709, we're in Canada. 589-4406. And we got oodles and oodles and oodles to get to, including Israel. It's gone crazy again. Looks like YouTube's got some new tricks up their sleeves. It's the show last night. When it was over, we had 9 views. So notice the time is 2 hours, 14 minutes. And we had 41 likes, but 9 views. A few minutes later, we had 12 views. 117 people watched the show, but we only had 9 views. 10 minutes later, my video was 22 seconds longer, and the comments section showed up. So normally that takes 12 hours. The comments section shows up for 12 hours, and the video gets longer, right at 12 hours. And that's been like that for almost 3 years. It's been doing that to us. That is very worrisome. So we're going to talk about Israel because there's a lot of words of nuclear getting thrown around. Just remind everybody, give you a quick, not a quick, but a in-depth look at what's currently going on there. Israel Netanyahu at the UN wipes the Palestinians off the map and menaces with a credible nuclear threat. So it was actually Benjamin Netanyahu was using nuclear threats before October the 7th. And he said the new Middle East here, and what you notice in that picture is Palestine doesn't exist on the map. It's actually all Israel at this point. Now remember, how did Israel get its start? Because Palestine used to be all the green, right? And it only took a few decades for nothing to be left of Palestine, and everything in Palestine was surrounded by Israel, and there was no way for them to survive. Imagine if you'd done that to the Israelis and to the Jews, if that had happened. Imagine the calamity. Now, this is the original first couple of days, this was everywhere. This is Israel's 911. But Israel's 911, they didn't even respond to the original invaders, so to speak, right? I'll play a clip of that. And everybody in Israel is still upset about the lack of response. They needed a justification to go in and destroy the rest of Palestine, right? Because they already destroyed all of it through many different wars. Not wars. None of these are wars. Which is why we got a poll tonight asking a simple question. Is Israel nuking Gaza? Because they're getting all the 155 millimeter depleted uranium rounds that was originally intended to go to Ukraine. Have been diverted to Israel because they're 4,000 tanks. They used depleted uranium munitions. So if Gaza had a standing army with 4,000 tanks and hundreds of jets and thousands of drones and a navy and a military and thousands of artillery, the howitzers and stuff like that, these big artillery machines, would they have done the things they're doing now? Of course not, because they've never fought a real army, right? They're just used to shooting fish in a barrel. And they have France, United States, and everybody else to pick up the slack for them. So when they invoked that this was their 911, when they invokes that this is their 911, I'm going to play a clip of an Israeli soldier. This is October the 7th. This is the same day. And she was asking people where the invaders had crossed the border, which is supposed to be the most protected border on the planet. She actually talked to them and said there was no resistance from the greatest so-called defense on the planet. Let's just listen to this, because it's very important to hear the truth.
October 7th, 2023. This is Efrat Fenigson, and I'm here to share an update from Israel-Hamas war, which started this morning. I'm going to share some key details and concerns, mostly based on Israeli citizens' voices from the ground and based on official statements. This is a very tough day for me and for us in Israel, and it is tough for people of Palestine too, especially now that Israel is starting to attack back. This war and every war is a horrible thing for everyone involved, except for those who get rich from it, right? This morning, around 6 a.m., around sunrise, hundreds of Hamas terrorists, at least 300, breached the border fence in multiple places, completely unimpeded, leading to terror attacks and kidnappings in Israeli towns or villages. The terrorists infiltrated a significant number of dry land outposts, as well as a naval infiltration point in Zikim. As we speak, Israel is actively engaged in combat in 22 outposts. This is from the IDF statement, the official statement. The attacks have already resulted in over 100 casualties and more than 100 kidnaps of Israeli citizens. In one village, 50 Israelis have been taken hostage, leaving people locked in shelters for long periods of 8 to 9 hours without rescue. By the way, the 100 kidnappings is not the official number. It's what we hear from people on the ground. I think official numbers talk about 30 or 40 people, but we know there are more. In some places, the terrorists were burning the village and people didn't know if to leave the shelter and surrender or stay and pray for the fire to not reach them. Many young people who were in a big outdoor party near the Gaza envelope villages were attacked there. Some ran away, some were injured, and some are still missing. Apparently, Israeli defense forces that were supposed to be around Gaza were placed around the West Bank because of security concerns, so that the Gaza envelope was left unoccupied with military. They say around 60 to 80% of that area was left without the IDF forces that were supposed to be there. Soldiers are being recruited for reserves as we speak from this morning, but because of stupid reasons such as no public transport, they're waiting hours to get to the bases. Mainstream media, this is an interesting point, apparently admits that IDF spokesperson is forbidding them to tell the complete truth about what's happening, highlighting a lack of transparency. And this is to the Israeli citizens. I'm not even talking about overseas. I'm talking about to the people of Israel here. For hours and hours, the reports that came from the mainstream media were completely lacking, and people started to rely mostly on the news from each other, from people on the ground. Only now, 6 p.m. Israel time, or it's actually 7 already, 12 hours after the event started, we received the first formal statement from the IDF spokesperson, and I will include an article with that statement in the notes. A year ago, there was a military operation in Gaza to prepare for such events, and ongoingly there are trainings for these kind of scenarios. This raises serious questions for me anyway about Israeli intelligence. What happened? 2 years ago, there was a successful deployment of underground barriers with sensors to alert exactly on these kind of terrorist breaches. Israel has one of the most advanced and high-tech armies. How come there was zero response to the border and fence breaching? I cannot understand that. Personally, I served in the IDF 25 years ago in the intelligence forces. There's no way, in my view, that Israel did not know of what's coming. A cat moving alongside the fence is triggering all forces. So this? What happened to the strongest army in the world? How come border crossings were wide open? Something is very wrong here. Something is very strange. This chain of events is very unusual and not typical for the Israeli defense system. With the recent normalization efforts of Israel and Palestine led by Saudi Arabia, I wonder whether a prisoners exchange deal is something that could only be seriously considered by Israel if a shocking event like that happened. Is it a possibility that only with Israel hostages it can be justified to release dangerous prisoners from Israeli prisons? I don't know. Mainstream media reported that Deputy Hamas leader Salah al-Aruri suggests using Israeli prisoners for leverage in negotiations. So maybe. A point about the situation in Israel in the past few years, which I want to make, is related to, and those who follow me know that there's a general sense of insecurity in Israel. There's political and social instability and unrest. Public funds are being misused on agendas such as COVID, climate, judicial reform, abolishing cash, and many more. The current government is highly corrupt in my view, while the previous one was no better. I don't care about having a popular opinion. I care about exposing evil forces wherever and whomever they are. So to me, this surprise attack seems like a planned operation on all fronts. This is a failure to protect the people of Israel, for sure. Perhaps the biggest failure since the Yom Kippur War exactly 50 years ago, if not bigger. By the way, is it a coincidence it's exactly 50 years ago, almost on the day? The Yom Kippur War was on October 6, 1973. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say that this feels like the work of the deep state. It feels like the people of Israel and the people of Palestine have been sold once again to the higher powers that be. At the same time, this is still very, very difficult to fathom. Have a good evening.
So she's clearly saying this is a false flag event. Like it's a planned operation on all fronts, not just suspicion, but it's a planned operation on all fronts. This is ex-IDF intelligent. And so that's a very strong statement. And then there was no official statement for 12 hours, so she was talking to people where it was happening, and she said there was no response from the military, and how could that even be possible? You know, you go back to 2014 and you see these types of connotations. I killed 13 Palestinian kids, says the sniper. He bragged about it. He didn't, not just a mission, he was up on Twitter bragging about it. So, like, obviously what's going on is a genocide. There's more evidence than that. So the poll tonight is asking an interesting question. Is Israelis nuking Gaza because it doesn't have tanks and jets and drones and navy and a military and artillery, etc., etc., etc.? Because Israel just flies around unchallenged, dropping whatever bombs they want, and a lot of them are just hideous weapons. Israel has around 4,000 plus tanks. They fire a DOLRAM, depleted uranium, low-level radioactive material, so-called. But these contaminate the food, the farm, the water. Israel has a massive fleet of suicide drones. And they were using white phosphorus on the population. So they would drop heavy ordnance on them, make them leave, get on the road, and then drop white phosphorus on them. There's just, but I mean, there's so much of this disconnect. Incredible disconnect. So Lindsey Graham, a U.S. senator, said, hit Gaza with a nuclear bomb. Hit Gaza with a nuclear bomb. It's not his first time he said that now, since October the 7th. And the weapons that Israel is using is the equivalent of a nuclear bomb in every 5 weeks or so. They're equal to 2 nuclear bombs. Netanyahu was quoted recently as saying, you must remember, this is the beginning, right? You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says the Bible. So he's quoting a Bible verse to justify the genocide. And so Amalek is their alleged enemy according to the Talmud or Torah. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, which is what we're seeing, the razing of the entire country. And spare them not. So spare them not. And we've seen those connotations right here where they shoot the children. He's not aiming looking for Hamas. He's shot the children. And he was never held accountable. He was never charged with crimes. He was given a promotion. But slay both man and woman, infant and sucklings, ox and sheep, camel and ass. This is a statement as they're going. This is not a war. You can't go to war against somebody who doesn't have an army. So this video, because of that statement, I want you to watch this particular little short video. And this statement should give you the context.
منطقة الرمال أنا بدي أحاول أغطي لكم قد ما أقدر.
It's total destruction, right? 3/4 of the country or more now looks like that, completely uninhabitable. Well, Israel hasn't suffered any such fate. Israel is not under siege of having their country destroyed or a genocide. They're the purveyor of misery. But the population is a military population, and so because there's been so many generations since the inception, the disconnect now is horrifying. They no longer act like people. They've switched off to those human attributes and now become a bully state, a monstrous state in many ways. So let's go back a few years, 2022, level the place, declares, or not, no, this was just after October 7th, declares Lindsey Graham as Israel does exactly that to Gaza. Again, like, as you go back and look at other conflicts, so-called conflicts, they're just shooting children. Not just shooting, but killing children, and not Hamas. They need Hamas. They got to have an enemy, right, to demonize, to justify soldiers with these types of connotations, right? Israel bombs Gaza, bombs dropped on Gaza equivalent to Hiroshima nuclear bombs. That was 5 weeks later. This November. Or that's the 2nd of November. That's 4 weeks later. It's not even 4 weeks later. So they had already destruction as far as the eye can see in a open air prison, right? U.S. Senator hit Gaza with a nuclear bomb to end the war. Well, that's not going to end the war. There is no war. It's just a slaughter, right? So this was yesterday, or this is dated today, but it happened the day before, on the 12th. Said in an interview yesterday that America was right when it hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki with a nuclear bombs, and that they should have given Israel the bombs they need to end the war. Israel has nuclears, allegedly up to 400, right? And he's still a senator after all these years, only because the Israeli lobby, right, keeps him in power so that he can fund the misery machine and give him endless American welfare and weapons. Hit Gaza with a nuclear bomb to end the war. Like, what would you think would happen if Israel nukes Gaza? What does Graham really think would happen? Does he really think the world would throw up their hands? Do you really think there's not going to be incredible blowback from that? America was right when it hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If it was, but how can you quantify? So now is it okay to do the same thing to China? Is it okay to do the same thing to Canada if you don't agree with them? Is the same thing to do to any of your so-called enemies? That's the solution now, is drop a nuclear bomb and move on to the next person you don't like, Graham? Israel has the bombs. They want the Dolram, depleted uranium bombs, because 4,000 tanks can fire a lot of those 155 millimeter, which has a 900-foot kill ratio, right? That's some of the carnage from a single bomb right there, look. That Graham is talking about. And they're doing all of this to get 10,000 Hamas. They've done the same thing to Israel, to Afghanistan and Iraq for 9 years to get 10,000 Taliban. They've done the same thing to Africa to get 10,000 Boko Haram. Millions dead, millions missing, millions in refugee camps, millions unaccounted for, millions of orphans, to get rid of the pensions and the patents of the countries. Same as they got done now, obviously, to Gaza. No water, no electricity. Imagine you've done that to Israel. The crying and screeching they'd be doing everywhere. Iranian lawmakers claim Iran possesses nuclear weapons. So Iran is now stating, and Israel still hasn't come out and fully admitted their nuclear weapons, so what's the big deal if Iran doesn't? Why is Israel better than Iran or anybody else? Because they're not. Israel's the fourth biggest weapons producer on the planet. They produce misery worldwide with the weapons they're producing. Their whole country is dependent upon that industry. Iranian lawmakers claim Iran possesses nuclear weapons. And this was an Israeli media, CNET, right? Or Ynet, rather. In a startling declaration, Iranian lawmakers asserted that the Islamic Republic of Iran possesses atomic weapon but has refrained from officially acknowledging it. Yeah, Israel never acknowledges anything. It justifies Iran's purported possessions of nuclear weapons by arguing that it enhances the country's deterrent capabilities. These are the exact same words Israel uses, by the way. Particularly in the face of perceived threats from the United States and Israel. These are not perceived threats, these are real. The Americans and the United Kingdom French have 49 military bases on Iran's borders, for goodness sakes, for decades. And they have nuclear, chemical, biological weapons at each of those bases. You have 49 bases on Iran's... I got a map here, actually, I believe. Let's see if I can get lucky and find it. Might take a second, or it might not. Here we go. Look how close Iran put their country to the Americans, Israeli, and United Kingdom and France's bases on their borders. Citing recent geopolitical developments such as Russia's actions in Ukraine and Israel's military operations in Gaza, well, there's been a lot of rhetoric about Iran, that they're going to attack Iran's nuclear power plant, which would cause a radioactive fallout worldwide on top of that. Like all Iran is going to do is bomb their nuclear base too, their nuclear plants too, right? And they can't stop it. As we've seen now from the last episode. Tehran's decision to limit the access of the International Atomic Energy Agency's inspectors, they're not inspecting Israel's nuclear weapons, are they? So little like children, the way they act all the time. They're not even that advanced. They're completely disconnected from the rest of the planet. It's them against everybody else, but nobody really gives a fuck about them until they go destroying the women and the children in other countries. Do whatever you have to do, says U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. That's what he's always said about the Israelis. He's never said anything different. His entire legacy is predicated upon those connotations exactly, right? Suggesting Gaza should be nuked to end the war. But it's not going to end the war if you nuke them. You really think that all the Muslim countries are going to sit in silence? And not only that, I mean, the whole world is going to turn immediately against Lindsey Graham if it does happen, and also against the fact that Israel would do something like that and poison the whole planet with that radioactive fallout. It's a very touchy thing. Again, and it would be crimes against humanity because they can't justify it. Palestinian, the Hamas, which shouldn't exist, but it were allowed to exist so that the Israelis could have somebody to demonize. Their bombs don't do this to Israel. You don't see any pictures like this at Israel, do you? Have you ever seen a picture like that at Israel? Have you ever seen a picture like this of Israel? Have you ever seen a picture like that of Israel? These are all Palestine. And these are always residential areas. A complete destruction. Now the destruction of 2/3 of the entire country doesn't exist anymore. And the last spot where they told the refugees to go, they're now currently going there and bombing them. It's quite telling, this disconnect that you see from them. So like in their culture, which is a genocidal culture, because they think they're better than everybody, that they're God's chosen people, but God didn't write a book and say they were God's chosen people. Somebody else wrote the book, which was probably them in the first place, right? Genocide permissible in Gaza, says the Times of Israel. Times of Israel, one of the biggest media is in Israel. So back to Lindsey Graham. Just like the U.S. did in Japan in the Second World War, another U.S. politician suggested Israel could resort to nuking Gaza to put an end to the war. Again, this is not going to make... He's done it on NBC, a major media in America and Canada, saying Israel should do what the U.S. did in 1945. Again, the disconnect is so crazy. The disconnect is unbelievable. Israeli military is using Palestinian children. Every single invasion of Israel, that was one of the first things we seen show up, was them using children as human shields. And so imagine these people who does this, fighting a real army with tanks and jets and drones and a navy and equal arms and thousands of howitzers and artilleries, and it simply wouldn't happen. They won't win because they don't have any combat experience. Their experience is they got weapon superiority, air superiority, sea superiority against a population that throws rocks back at them. And they justify shooting the children because that's what their parents done. That's what their brothers and sisters done. That's what their aunts and uncles done. And if they don't do it, then they're less than them, right? And the reality of it is, here's another one to think about. Israel minister vows a Palestinian Holocaust. Well, I think they brought that to fruition, didn't they? U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham has urged Israel to use a nuclear bomb in Gaza, but they already did. It was already equal to 2 Hiroshima bombs before the first month was up. So now it's obviously 6 months later after that, it's equal to 12 more nuclear weapons. 12 more Nagasaki's. This is a typical 155 millimeter depleted uranium round from their tanks. That's what it does. Israel doesn't get hit with any of those bombs. And because they're emboldened by that now, they call for a total genocide because they know that the Palestinians can't do it to them. So now the country is ran rampant. They're literally like a bunch of jackals with rabies at this stage. When we were faced with destruction as a nation after Pearl Harbor, says shithead Graham, fighting the Germans and the Japanese, we decided to end the war by bombing now Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they had never used a nuclear weapon before. They didn't know if it was going to work. But yet they had a uranium bomb and a plutonium bomb. So they knew it was going to work. Why use two different bombs? To get a point across if you weren't sure it was going to work, because you're going to leave the technology in the enemy's hands, right? So they knew it was going to work, see? And they picked Hiroshima and Nagasaki is because they were untouched by the fire bombs. And it was just a few days before that the U.S. military had firebombed Tokyo and killed a couple of 100,000, burned women and children, a couple of 100,000 to death. With fire bombs, because the houses were built of a lot of rice paper, right? And they knew it would burn insane from the other communities they had used the technique on. I think calling for a genocide is a crime against humanity on its own, isn't it? The South Carolinian Representative Ranson attempting to justify Israel resorting to such tactics as it was okay for the U.S. to do so in Japan, so therefore it's okay for Israel to do it. Then it should be okay for the Palestinians to do the same thing to Israel, right? Or the same thing for Iran to do the same thing to Israel to protect the victims, shouldn't it? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and not for Israel to do it? Well, if it's okay for Israel to do it, it's okay for Iran to do it to Israel. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? There's a war of genocide and starvation. No food, no water, no electricity, and using disproportionate force against a population that can't defend themselves, can't retaliate. And they've destroyed every hospital, every university, every monument in the country has been completely eradicated. And they post videos online as they do it, all proud of themselves, right? Because now it's a society that is a bunch of rabid dogs now running loose, eating everything it comes in contact with. Their children are just an extension of their brothers and their parents and their grandparents, right? Who've done the exact same thing. In late March, U.S. Congressman Tim Walburn said Gaza should be nuked rather than build a pier to facilitate humanitarian aid. I got stories of Israel digging up, like there's lots of people buried under the rubble, and they actually got videos of Israel digging up the rubble to build a pier with dead bodies in it. It's unbelievable. The disconnect. And just because every generation in Israel has to participate in the genocide, they have to join the military-industrial complex. They might even work at it. Certainly, everybody in their family has worked at it. And this is a disconnect, and they're fighting somebody they can't fight back. And they call themselves soldiers. They call it a war for some reason. In November last year, around a month after the start of the war on October the 7th, this is not a war, though. One side has superior military, Air Force, drones, Navy, they have tanks, they have everything the other side doesn't have. They have all kinds of countries supplying it for free. They have a massive amount of doctors around the world going there to do trauma surgery on the Israelis that do get injured. And so they don't have any incentive not to be evil at all that we can critique. So dropping a nuclear weapon on Gaza is an option. But it's pretty easy to appreciate they've done the animosity equivalent every 4 weeks of at least 2 Nagasaki, Hiroshima bombs worth of destruction and equivalent. And even all the refugee camps has been bombed into non-existence. There is nowhere safe, and they have no qualms with it. This is all they know. Their whole legacy is predicated upon deceit, dishonesty, destruction, genocide. This is completely genocide to fight a population that can't fight back. And they're not attacking Hamas, they're killing the women and the children. And that was invoked by the Amalek speech from Benjamin Netanyahu. We're fighting human animals, we are acting accordingly. I would beg to differ. I would say that the Israelis are the human animals. To go and do this to women and children and justify it as Hamas. And they didn't even challenge Hamas when they crossed the borders. They let them do it so they can justify a genocide. Truly coward, eh? It's incredible cowardness on display. One of their generals, or senior military degenerate gallant, said Israel is moving to full offensive and Gaza will never go back to what it once was. That was October the 10th, 3 days later. So they had already made up their mind that they were going to level Gaza, not go after Hamas, but level Gaza. Because that's what they're saying, see? They're not saying Hamas, we're going to deal with Hamas. No, they're saying Gaza will never go back to what it once was. And he wasn't lying, was he? And they got 4,000 tanks that fires ammunition, and each one of them will do this. Each one of their bombs from the tanks, not the big howitzers, the big artillery, they got an endless amount of them that can fire from 20 to 30 miles away. And that's what they're doing in the safety of complete. And they're not worried about being attacked. We will eliminate everything, and they will regret it. So we eliminate everything, and this is what we've seen, right? They are eliminating everything. And they're doing it, they have no fear of retaliation. Right, there's some resistance, small pocket resistance, but if you're doing that to the whole country, do you not expect the people to try to fight back? Right? Do you really expect them not to try to fight back? To utilize whatever they got at their fingertips in desperation? They got no food, no electricity, no water. You destroyed their graveyards, their educational, their hospitals, their refugee camps, their infrastructure, and their hope and dreams. And you justify it the most cowardly way conceivable, the most indefensible way imaginable, and the most unsustainable way conceivable. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, evoked a biblical analogy referring to the Israelites' enemy, largely interpreted as a genocidal call to wipe out Gaza. You must remember what the Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible. We do remember, he said, during an official video statement. And what's really interesting about Benjamin Netanyahu was his youngest son, when he was around 15 years old. He's much older than that now. Because I remember back in the day, had won a contest that he was able to recite the entire Torah or the Talmud, I can't remember. And therefore, Benjamin Netanyahu was able to ask his son where it says that he can justify using extreme force. And his son was able to do that. And he was able to use that for a political maneuver. And I think the world forgets that particular attribute. And when he said that, of course, you must remember, he was accused of a genocidal intention in Gaza after his holy mission speech, which is that speech right there, right? I don't forget. We cover mostly nuclear. And because they're invoking nuclear, I'm going to be covering it tonight, obviously. I'm not going to just sit in silence like the majority of people have done that have a presence in the blogosphere, for instance. There will be no electricity and no water in Gaza. There will only be destruction. You wanted hell, you will get hell. What do you mean you wanted hell? It's been hell there for 60 years, hasn't it? You got 5 million refugees outside Palestine. A lot of them are living in barbed wire fence tent cities surrounded by Israeli soldiers with German Shepherd dogs. You're the epitome of what you said happened to you in Germany. You're doing your worst, literally worse. Moshe Fielding, the founder of Israel's right-wing Zadouk party and former Likud, these are the crazies, the headbangers, representative in Israeli parliament, has also called for the complete destruction of Gaza. And this goes way back, right? If you look at the former prime minister's son, he had said we need to flatten entire neighborhoods in Gaza, which, of course, now has come to fruition, right? And even back then, they used the white phosphorus. They've always used the white phosphorus, I noticed. There is one and only one solution, which is completely destroyed Gaza before invading it. So you're not going after Hamas, you're going after Gaza. You're going after the Palestinians. And the average age there is 15 or 16 years old. And because they've always fought back with rocks, because that's the only tools they got. Hamas wasn't fighting back, it was the Palestinian children, right? Remember Yasser Arafat? They're going to exhume his body and may answer questions over his death in 2012 because there's a lot of evidence to suggest he was poisoned with polonium, which is one of the state governments. You're guaranteed to kill the person when you poison with them, right? Israel's goal should not be to eliminate Hamas, rather, but Gaza should be razed and Israel's rule should be restored to the place. This is our country. So that was a statement from a high-level government official saying the goal should not be to eliminate Hamas, because you got to have a boogeyman, but rather Gaza should be razed and Israel's rule should be restored to the place. There was no Israel's rule to the place outside of genocide, right? The Nakba. And meanwhile, another Likud member in Parliament said there should be two goals for the victory. One, there is no more Muslim land in the... This is a bigoted and biased and prejudiced and racist statement at best in the land of Israel. And after we make it the land of Israel, Gaza should be left as a monument like Sodom. So again, like there's these connotations of genocide that are completely undeniable. And there's a complete disconnect from the proportion. And as the Israeli spokesperson I played for you earlier clearly suggested that Israel allowed it to happen, if not, and maybe even helped it happen. Nakba to the enemy now, this is our Pearl Harbor. Right? Remember, they originally came out saying it's their 911. Let me see if I can find some of that. Oh, we got a bit more there. Yeah, here's some more. Israel-Palestinian, they attacked us on the ground, air, sea, and killed civilians. But Israel has the best wall. They have underground defenses and networks to alarm them. And they didn't reply to any of it. They allowed everybody to come in and do the harm, kill the civilians. And they eventually they did went out there and they burnt their own citizens to death to stop them from being taken hostages, right? Which is the Hannibal directive. And look at this. This is our 911, says Israel. And uniformly worldwide on the first day, all the media used that connotation. This is Israel's 911. Like, is there anywhere in Israel that looks like this? Quote me if I'm wrong. Is there anywhere in Israel that looks like that? Israel Heritage Minister said in a radio interview that dropping an atomic bomb on Gaza was a possible tactic Israel could employ. That's an incredible statement, isn't it? Genocide permissible in Gaza at the times of Israel. And so they always see, every time that there's any kind of conflict, Israel invokes using nuclear weapons, right? Is it because they're so childlike or childish? I wonder. Facebook has approved adverbs calling to wipe out Gaza, its women, children, and elderly, as well as to kill the Palestinians, burn down Gaza, deport Palestinians to other countries, and carry out a second Nakba, which was in the 50s or 60s when they displaced millions and killed a couple of 100,000, I believe, was it? In 1969, former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir stated there was no such thing as Palestinians, which is an incredible statement because that's how they ended up with Jerusalem, was they took it from the Palestinians, right? And Jerusalem, of course, Jerusalem is considered, certainly by the Talmud and the Torah, that it goes something like this: the world eventually will turn against Israel, even if Israel got to force them to do it, it'll happen. And then God will come down, destroy the whole planet, and we don't know how that's the Revelations, is it? Will come down and destroy the whole planet, and only those in Jerusalem will go to heaven. So it's not like Israel will survive it, or the Jews anywhere else where they're going to survive it, or whatever the case may be, because there's a lot of, it's the people that are in, whether it's Muslim or Canadian, it doesn't matter, the people that are in Jerusalem will go to heaven. Some of the batshit crazy shit imaginable, and they cry about the Muslims' version, right? And so the headbangers, there's been over 1 million of the headbangers, right? The Orthodox Jews in Israel, and they don't work, they don't have an education. They study the two books called the Torah and the Talmud, and that's their whole ideology is from those two particular books, right? And they're completely bigoted against women. But their whole world is based on two books written by somebody they don't know. It certainly wasn't God. God didn't write the Torah and the Talmud. And so they think they're God's chosen people because it's in the Torah and the Talmud, but God didn't write the Torah and the Talmud. Somebody else wrote it. So they don't even know that person. They never met that person. And they got to have blind faith, which is pretty friggin' dangerous, right? And so their whole ideology that they're the victims simply isn't true, because when you look at Palestine, for instance, you can see what they're actually like in real life, what they portray in reality. Since the war began, the United States, United Kingdom, and European countries have sent large sums of arms, equipment, and troops to the region, aircraft carriers, warships. And when you start mainstreaming the language, it's hard to imagine the outcome in Israel is going to be a society in which Palestinians can coexist. You can't coexist in a society where soldiers demonstrate this kind of contempt, right? It simply can't be done. They're not going after Hamas, they're going after the children. Because the children don't have tanks and jets and drones and navies and everything. The children are not going to shoot them back, right? That's your typical Israeli soldier, right? They put all these videos. I think I got around 700 little video clips of them bragging, after destroying communities and neighborhoods and pet animals and everything else. It's really something. The consensus of it is undeniable. It's a mentally ill society. And a mental ill society with nuclear weapons. Oh, we're almost through it. You know, they brought in 300,000 reservists from all around the world, by the way. And so there's this complete disconnect, right? That's fodder for the front lines in case there is resistance, right? But all of this is to support the million headbangers, the ultra-Orthodox Jews. Because the whole foundation is based upon the Orthodox Jews, right? And you even got lawmakers calling to erase Gaza from the face of earth. So what is the society ultimately going to end up like when you wipe out entire families, but you whine and snivel when one of your Israeli soldiers get hurt? But you don't have zero sympathy for the children, zero sympathy for the victims. It's really something. It's really... like when you draw a conclusion that leaves you no other... or when you draw just the picture, you're left with this conclusion that this is a genocide. And they don't have a right to invoke the Holocaust anymore. And the Holocaust survivors have spoken out numerous times that don't use the Holocaust to justify what you're doing to Gaza. They have nothing in common. And Israel has always taken the coward way out, right? Can you imagine if you dropped the equivalent of 2 Hiroshima nuclear bombs worth of munitions on Israel? You still couldn't justify what they got done. You simply can't justify it. And so this show tonight was supposed to be about... I got a nuclear show set up, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stop the video basically right here and change the title and let it percolate out there on the internet so that there is an actual a lucid narrative existing for a little while. Now, we notice the censorship has gone into overdrive here tonight. And that's normal. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't control the censorship, right? Yeah, and the GMO red heifer doesn't deserve to be sacrificed. Because that's one of our worries is... there was a comment from James Lewis. That's one of our worries is that Israel would just make a GMO heifer and then use that to whip up the frenzy for the crazies, for the religious crazies in Israel to justify Armageddon, so to speak. The only reason the world is going to turn against Israel is because they're forcing the world to turn. Right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're attacking a country that can't defend itself. Right? The GMO red heifer doesn't deserve this. That's fucking hilarious, man. Is Israel nuking Gaza because it does not have tanks and jets and drones and navy and a military and artillery and everything else? Well, of course it is. If Israel didn't have doctors all over the world to come in and patch up the soldiers that are being harmed, you probably couldn't get an Israeli soldier to go there, right? They're not going there because they're brave. They're going there because they're not worried about tanks or drones or jets or helicopters or navies or anything else. They're going there because they don't have to worry about it. There's pockets of resistance, but if you destroy a country, you can expect to get some pockets of resistance. And just imagine if a superior force was doing it to Israel. Would Israel not try to defend itself? And I'm not going to apologize for pointing out the obvious. I'm not going to apologize for calling them cowards for doing what they're doing, because they're cowards for doing what they're doing. Imagine, like, it boggles the mind that a soldier posted on Twitter that he killed, and Facebook, that he killed 13 Palestinian kids. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's the society that he lives in. That's considered acceptable. See? You need Hamas because you got to have a boogeyman, so you can justify killing the women and the children and destroying a country that doesn't deserve to be destroyed. You already stole all their land. You can't look them in the face anymore, so you have to destroy them, right? That's the reality, isn't it? You know I'm right. You know I'm right. Okay, well, we'll see everybody tomorrow night. I'm going to close the poll down here. Incredible censorship again tonight. Nuclear for dummies. Is Israel nuking Gaza because it doesn't have tanks and jets and helicopters and drones and a navy and a military and artillery, and countries throwing weapons and money at it constantly, and they can't defend themselves? Yeah, of course not. That's the only reason they do it. They've never found a way to fight Africa. And then the Air Force and Germans and helicopters and tanks. They live in a fantasy if they think they can win. What they're doing there, right? Have a great night. See everybody tomorrow night. We'll get back up to regular schedule. First show ready to go. My apologies. Sometimes though you gotta tell the story, right? So I feel better if I tell the truth than I do. I'm not telling the truth. So the truth is definitely redeeming. Have a great night. We'll see everybody. That's a bit loud, eh? See everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.